who is the Chief Innovation Officer at Approach Services. Thanks for joining us, Eva.
Thanks for having me, Karen.
Today, Eva's going to be sharing with us the case study and the case study questions and answering any of your questions. So before we start, Eva, can you tell us a little bit about what the role of Chief Innovation Officer and the work that you do?
Yeah, so Chief Innovation Officer is obviously a role that's fairly new to the executive teams. I'm working for a change leadership training and consulting business. So in my role, it's all around supporting within the organization and then our clients' executive teams as well, that they can be innovative, sustainable, competitive, and grow. When I do that with organizations and clients, I work with the executive team as an equal, because that's what I'm doing within my organization as well.
Awesome. And so the organizations that you work with are generally not-for-profit organizations?
Yeah, we focus a lot on the Australian government and non-for-profit market, because we feel that the change leadership capability is quite heavily in need there and also quite underdeveloped at the moment, because it is a new skill set that's needed for executive teams.
And most of these executive teams are generally located in metro regions?
Yeah, we were founded in Perth, so naturally that's where our focus is at the moment, in Perth and metropolitan region. I would say that with this year and the push for digitalization and globalization, we're now able to reach clients Australia-wide, because we have an online academy as well. So it's going to be exciting moving forward, working more virtually with clients.
Excellent. And I would imagine some of the not-for-profits do have elements and pockets of leadership throughout Australia. So that's really good to have that capability. And in terms of the COVID-19, so when we look at the case study scenario that we have for this particular case study, the organization is going through a digital transformation, and that digital transformation is seeking to improve the collaboration and remote working, and that's quite a key topic at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite interesting with this organization. They actually had the need of collaborating virtually and remotely before, because they have quite a large team that's going to rural and remote areas within WA, and it's always been a problem for them to collaborate and work together. But then obviously with COVID bringing it to the forefront of most businesses that innovation in the digital space is needed to be competitive and sustain, they've now brought this strategic project forward. And they're now looking at implementing systems that allow people, no matter where they are, to work and collaborate with each other. Whereas previously they probably accepted it as something, oh yeah, that's quite hard for us, but we live with it. It's remote. It's now like, no, it's remote, but there are digital and technical solutions that we can still work and collaborate with one another. So it's become a burning platform for them to do that this year.
Brilliant. And the workforce, as we all know, despite obviously a lot of people have been forced this year, but the workforce is still generally made up of quite a lot of different personality types, isn't it? And they all have to get that buy-in for the system to be effective.
Yeah, so one thing that's quite interesting when we work with our clients is that projects are often they're often started with the solution in mind. So they're saying like, we want to have a technical system that allows us to collaborate, and the people come a little bit as an afterthought. So the whole change management and change leadership that we are focusing on makes sure that we don't forget that people actually have to change the way they work, the way they interact with one another. And we know that people are made up of all sorts of different personalities, and for some that comes more natural, for others that's a little bit harder. Change in general comes more natural for some personalities than for others. So the way we educate leaders is to be able to reach all different personality types during their change leadership.
And that leads us really nicely, actually, into the first question, which are what are the common reasons why workers resist change?
There's a lot of things that I've read a lot in what I call pop leadership. So like all these articles that we find online about like leadership and change leadership often say like resistance comes every time you change. And that's true in a way, but resistance is also a word that doesn't allow us to embrace it really. Resistance as such kind of means like it's against the change. Whereas most workers or employees actually resist change for good reasons or good concerns. So I like to look at resistance with the executives as engagement. And studies have shown that higher engagement actually leads to better change. So if we look at it as engagement, then we can try and understand what are the common reasons for resisting. And it's often just a lack of understanding why the change is needed now, or why is it needed in general?
Yeah.
Why do we change something that has worked before? Is a common question that we hear. It's also often a lack of visible change leadership. So seeing the leaders do it first, so I can believe that this is actually going to happen, combined with often a history of failed changes within the organization. And then we all know change comes with a higher level of uncertainty and stress. So what we find is that when people are afraid about losing their jobs, or they're afraid about getting their livelihoods impacted, that is also a main reason for resisting change. And I guess last but not least, is it's a little bit about interacting and reaching them on a personal level rather than a one size fits all.
Yeah, and I can imagine that the media and other inputs would have a big impact on that those fears that come in terms of, I might lose my job, is this going to take over my role? Will I be needed anymore? I guess.
Exactly, yeah. And those are things that people are afraid to say.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to be seen as someone that could be put aside.
Yeah, that's it, because they don't want to then put the idea into somebody's head either. Yeah. So our next question, and you mentioned and you touched on this already, is about so you mentioned that a lot of people sometimes need to have that proof and that evidence. And if they can see that leaders are actually putting that into place already, then they kind of get that trust. And that's our next question, which is, how can leadership role model and how can they actually drive that change?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting field that we're working in. Change leadership is quite a niche, although probably the term is used for various different things. And even change management, which has been on the market for approximately 25 years, is still a niche skill, right? So a lot of times organizations don't understand that the change is driven from the leadership within, and you can't outsource that to an external consultant. The main thing, and I'm going to plug something in here, but the main thing really for leaders to do something is to be really clear about what their values are. And we use toolkits like this one, which is called the Lara, where we sit down with the executives and we say like, okay, so what are the values that you think apply to this change? And if we say with the case study, we're probably going to say like, okay, flexibility and cooperation are two main values for us. And then we work with them through being really clear, what's the behavior that you would like to see, that you're going to reward? So where the consequences for that behavior are positive, and which are the ones where the consequences are negative. And all the ones in the room or not in the room that are parents probably go like, oh yeah, I do that with my kids, or I hope I do that with my kids. But really, leadership is a little bit like that as well. You want to be really clear upfront with your employees. What are the consequences to expect for positive and negative behaviors, and what are the behaviors we would like to see more with this digital transformation? For example, logging into the system, trying, like failing with the system, teaching others how to use it, like sharing some of the experience and stuff like that. So we then use the tool to set goals, which is pretty straightforward, but it's something that's very rarely done when leaders are involved in change. And that's the way they role model the change. So people see them actively being in the front, in the lead of the change journey, and they see them as humans failing or trying, not quite aligning yet, but trying to align, helping others. And that's really powerful for successful change. Generally speaking, reality is often that they sign off on the project and then hope for an external consultant to switch on the solution, and hopefully everyone is doing what they want them to do so they can move on with their business life. So that's where we're helping to develop that responsibility and the skill set.
Yeah, and that's really good, isn't it? And that, I guess, that leads us again on to the next question, is about how leaders can improve their communication with their teams. And so
actually, that's probably the number one question we get. Because for a lot of organizations, change management and change is all a communications problem. When we do the education, it's one of 6 big capabilities we're developing, and communicating change is super important, but it's not the one bullet that fits it all. But communication in general obviously has 2 ways, and what happens often in businesses and organizations is that when the changes are introduced, it's a one-way communication. We're feeding more and more information. If that doesn't work, we're feeding more information, or more frequent or louder. Again, similar to parenting sometimes. So really what we want to do is we want to actually use the other channel, looking for resistance, concern, engagement, and listening, and actually being listening from a place where we don't judge, and listen from a place where we have an open mind, that we understand that sometimes the people that voice concerns are closer to the solution. They are the ones that are impacted and have to use it, and they probably have some concerns that are valid, and even if not, they probably don't understand our jargon and lingo. So when we do communicating change with the executives, we raise a lot of awareness about the different personality types, but also about like the validness of the feedback that comes back. It seems like it costs more time to listen, and it seems like it costs more time to be there in person and share your body language and your tone as well as just the message. But it cuts down on all the rework, the trouble, the resistance that is not fruitful, and therefore saves costs like losing employees or absenteeism that rises and those things. So yeah. Sorry, I give you long answers.
That's great.
But I'm very passionate about this. So.
Yeah, no, it's actually really informative, and it's like you say, the listening is so important, because I think as well it's that element of motivation and feeling acknowledged, and just being told to do something and being told because I said so, and because that's just the way it isn't how people want to be treated. And if you do want to keep good employees, and you want to motivate them, and you want to keep and retain them within your organization, then you do need to listen, and that's a big part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, lots of research actually shows that the higher we engage, I'm saying that relates to very complex social environments, which businesses are usually complex social environments. So for simple change, that doesn't really apply. But for complex change, which business is mostly complex change, you really want to raise the co-creation bit, you want to raise the engagement bit, and you want to have that back and forth. Like that's why project methodologies like Agile have been born, because it allows for co-design and human-centered design. It allows for that back and forth and short iterations. And I think that's really some key to being successful as a change leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the communication, especially with something like a digital transformation, would you say that a lot of the concerns are fears on how to use the technology?
It really is quite an individual thing. But what we find non-for-profits in particular, it's not necessarily a high office or technical environment. So like the skill sets of being like cutting edge technology is a little bit lower than we find in other industries.
Yeah.
And so yes, that definitely plays into it. Also, like if we have a more like an older workforce, we often find people that they are just a little bit more frightened about it. But the number one reason is really the lack of understanding why the change is needed. And the second one is the lack of visible change leadership. So if we can target those two with the organization, we're almost there. Like we're less likely to have people who fear about their job, because when they really understand why it's necessary, and they understand that without that organization cannot sustain or compete or grow, they are often willing to learn again, no matter how old they are or how not tech savvy they are, because they understand if it's important, there will be budget for training, there will be time for training, right? So those things are really important.
Brilliant. And I'm sure there are so many trainers and teachers that are watching this who can completely understand how, you know, the impact of, you know, and also we hear it a lot from students as well, but, you know, but why do you want to do this? Why? You know, it's just a natural inquiry. You know, you want to know that you're doing something for a reason. And absolutely.
There are certain change management methodologies out there that actually say without ticking that step, the why, you can't even proceed to the next one, which is the desire to change. So if you believe those methodologies, you pretty much have a hard stop without addressing a compelling vision for the change, a compelling reason why this is necessary now.
Yeah.
The motivation bit.
Absolutely. And so I guess the final question with the case study before we move on to the questions we've received.
Yeah.
What is the big difference? Because we've heard a lot about change management over the years, and obviously the term change leadership. What is the difference between the two, and what does that mean for you as an external consultant? How does that affect your role, the difference between management and leadership?
The difference is quite crucial. Change management and change leadership sometimes get confused because change leadership has become somewhat a buzzword this year, but change management and change leadership are very different. So change management is the complement to project management. It's a set of, it's an approach or a set of strategies that looks at how do we not forget the people side of the project or the people side of the transition that's going on. So they plan the strategies, how we train, how we communicate, how we coach people, and how big is the impact on which workforce, what sort of resistance can we expect. That's something that's often sits within a team or an individual person and can easily be outsourced. Yet change leadership is something that really needs to come from the organization's leadership team. It's a capability, a competence, a skill. It's also something that you can't just switch on. You got to learn it over time and refine and master it. And it's a series of leadership competencies that helps leaders to guide and inspire others to change their behaviors, because we all know behavioral change is very hard. And it's something that we're very easily drawn to revert back to old behaviors unless we have someone that encourages us or holds us accountable. So that's the difference. So when we work in change leadership, we're training and we're helping people with tools and simple tools and now I have a blank, but we're helping people with very simple tools to actually be better change leaders, breaking down good big concepts like communicating to something that's actionable. Practical was the word I was looking for. Something practical that they can do straight away.
Because I can imagine that a lot of leaders, they sometimes get their promotion because they're good at their job.
Yeah.
And leadership in its own is a skill in its own right, isn't it? It's a skill set that needs to be developed. So, all that. And did you say you mentioned the C's? Is that that's part of your training?
Yeah. So we've got That's probably a little bit more something I'll talk about in the next question, but we've got a change management approach, which is the 6 C's. And that's really looking at all the different aspects of managing a digital transition with not forgetting the people. And then we have the Accelerate Change Leadership program, which is a training program that consists of 6 different courses or workshops, and they look at like improving communicating change skills or conflict and resistance management during change, and also how you actually do become a better role model by aligning values and behaviors. So those things. You just triggered my mind there. One of the things we do when we start workshops live with organizations is a little raise of hands for, they're often senior managers, for the people within the room, how many of them had formal leadership training or communication training or change training and stuff. And you'd be surprised how very few of them actually get professional skills training. It's a lot more around the technical skills, and they are often technical experts in what they do, but they really struggle with what they call difficult personalities, but that's really interpersonal skills. So
yeah, definitely. And that's actually the end of our case study questions, and we have had a couple of questions come in by email. And the first one is, with obviously the new changes in the digital transformation that's about to happen, how can the organization gather the data? So what processes can they take to gather data to identify, what procedures, so what changes need to happen in the procedures, and determine how they're going to be applied in practice?
So that's the question where I thought this is probably where it fits better. So when it comes to really planning out the project from a change management aspect, we use a methodology that's called the 6 C's, or we developed a approach services 6 C's, and there are 6 different steps that are really important. And the first 2 steps, they are actually related to gathering data and getting insights from the key stakeholders and impacted work groups. And if you think about 2 steps out of 4 are relevant to actually gathering data, then you can see that that's quite a different approach. We want to listen and we want to get something. The first step is co-creation. That's a workshop with all the key stakeholders. And what we do in there is like go through all the key questions of the project and gather as much insights as we can and answer that and build hypothesis for that. And that often comes, key stakeholders, they're the executive managers and the key managers and so forth, maybe some representatives of the different areas, but that's just one side of the story. So then the second C is the co-sensing, where we send these key stakeholders plus some of our team members as external consultants into the areas that we presume are the ones that are most impacted. And the co-sensing is to test the hypothesis, to really listen for how will that impact people, what's their day-to-day at the moment, and how will it look like in the future, what are their concerns, and where can we expect resistance, and how can we engage those people, are there any local change advocates that we can draw on, that people look to and look for advice. So those are the key insights that we gather at the start. The question is asking a little bit more about the different in policies and processes and systems. And those things fall into what I call business analysis as a job title. So a BA or business analyst would usually sit in the project team under the project manager. So we work really closely with the project manager, but we don't provide that skill set, because it is very good when you are not distracted between caring about the people and caring about the technology. So you work together and you collaborate, but you make sure you really care about the people, so you don't forget that, because as soon as you try and do both, the numbers always win. So that's what a BA does, and the people side, that's what we do. So,
excellent. So, and the final one, we talked about the communication earlier, but in terms of communicating the new changes to their employees around the digital transformation, so you know, what strategies might the organization carry out to deal with requests or issues that might arise from the transformation? So, you know, is there sort of like a Q&A session, or is there any way that they can actually manage the requests or issues as they arise?
Yeah, so we use it's called a communication plan, and it's a big set of, it's a toolbox, a big set of options that are all based on best practices that have been done by different organizations within all sorts of different industries.
Yeah.
And we try and guide the executives toward any channel or any communication that is ideally live, because it allows for unstructured conversations and back and forth, ideally two-way. If it can't be live, then we try and guide them towards anything that involves visuals, because we know that most of the communication during change is actually the unsaid, the in between the lines, because stress levels and uncertainty are high. So we want to make sure that a leader can communicate with their body and can radiate that they're role model and radiate that they're confident about this, or human, you know.
Yeah.
So those are probably the things we try and steer people to. The natural tendency of an executive is to do the opposite, because they are actually affected by the change themselves.
Yeah.
And when we are changing ourselves, we get very insecure, and we don't want to be seen as insecure when we're leaders. So like naturally organizations would like to just have someone officially write a nice sounding communication like email or post and so forth. So it's like this constant, maybe we try this, get out of your comfort zone, okay, a little bit of that, and then you go back. So it's a give and take. And you also have to obviously work with the remote staff. So a lot of times those people get forgotten. And so the communication plan that we're using has a lot of ideas as to how you can actually include them. And a lot of organizations are surprised how many options there are for including remote staffs nowadays.
Yeah, and one of the things that really rang out and sort of come through in your answer then as well was the idea that obviously when people are communicating, the emotions are going to be quite high. So I guess there must be a really important element of that is seeking clarification.
Yeah.
To make sure that you understand what it is they're asking, or what their concern might actually be.
Yeah, I would say, like, with what we do, we've got like two really strong lines of partnership. One partnership is with organizations that work in the digital transformation space, the real techies that lack that focus on the paper. And the other one is actually in that mental health space. So like those people that really know best how to support and counsel people through high stress environments. And so for us, whilst we're neither expert at each end, we've worked across that as a medium a lot. And it's very important to acknowledge that any sort of change really affects people, and it hits right into the main part of the brain, and it hits the fight or flight response. And that's not because we're not adult enough, or we're not strong enough, or resilient enough. That's actually a really good system, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to give people time to process and tools to process, and confidence that they're not wrong. It is actually what we're supposed to feel like when change happens, until we develop a very strong, confident way of changing that our comfort zone has shifted a bit. You know, like we've got that strong growth mindset that change needs to be quite hard and radical for us to actually still throw us off our normal game, right? So that's what we're trying to achieve, a higher maturity and a higher level of competence when it comes to change leadership and change management.
That's brilliant. And we've actually reached the end of our into our discussion now, and we haven't had any more questions come through live. So Thank you.
I hope it wasn't too,
No,
too
it
much
was
jargon.
fantastic. It was great, and all of our sessions are recorded. So obviously, trainers, you can watch at a time that's more convenient for you, catch up and watch and work with your case study. So I'd just like to thank you, Eva, for your time. And if anyone was interested in finding out a little bit more about the work that you do with change management, how can they find out more about you?
If they're interested in like just keeping abreast change leadership news, I would say like follow us on LinkedIn. We post almost daily information there, so that would be really good. And then obviously they can reach out to us as well. We've got a YouTube channel that's slowly growing, and obviously our website, which is www.approach-services.com. So on there, we've got a few things and resources as well. But all our team is very approachable, which is why we're called Approach Services. And so if someone is keen and interested, we're really on a mission to drive better change leadership around the world. We want to touch as many organizations as possible. So I'd love to hear from people that are interested in this skill. And in fact, maybe that's a nice story. The last organization I worked with, one of the senior managers decided to go back to uni and study a little bit more around change and change leadership because she was so inspired by what we're doing. And that's something that really drives me and like makes me very happy because it is a very new skill and it's very important for people's well-being.
Behavior change. It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for sharing. It's really valuable, and appreciate all of your insights.
Thank you very much for having me. I actually enjoyed this. This was good.